Hi and welcome to this session about DATEX II and OpenAPI. My name is Jonas Jäderberg. First, some background. What is OpenAPI? Well, it's a specification / standard that you can read about more about at openapis.org. Some definition I took from the website. The OpenAPI specification is a specification language for HTTP APIs that provides a standardized means to define your APIs to others. So you can see it as a contract to your APIs. So it is like WSDL is for XML web services. It's a similar thing, different technology. OpenAPI can use JSON schemas, or it can also use their own syntax, which is almost JSON schemas. And in DATEX 2, we have a JSON PSM and have for a couple of years. So the web tool, you can generate JSON schemas. And in spring 2023, we tested our JSON schemas with the OpenAPI frameworks, different frameworks. And what we could say is that it didn't work out of the box. And we also did some more tests with a more advanced JSON mapping where we use polymorphism. From JSON schema perspective, that worked very well, but we didn't get it to work as good as we wanted with OpenAPI frameworks, you could say. It looks like it's a too advanced feature and the tool support looks too immature. The specification itself, OpenAPI 3 and 3.1, should support it, but as we found out, it would be to get interoperability to work between different tools and frameworks. That seems impossible today, I should say. About OpenAPI frameworks, we tested OpenAPI Generator, which we think is probably the one that it is the most developed currently. We also tested NSWAG, which is for .NET and TypeScript only. It works very well with Visual Studio and Microsoft. And we also tested Swagger Codegen, which is maybe the first big framework available. And actually, OpenAPI Generator is a fork of Swagger Codegen. There are probably a lot of other frameworks available, but this is the three ones that we have tested on. We tested this with C#, .NET 6, and probably 7 sometimes. Python using Flask and Java using Spring. What we found out about for C#, .NET 5 or later, and Swag worked best. OpenAPI Generator looks like a very good framework that has a lot of different languages, support for different languages. And it generates a very good project and so on, with lots of code and test cases. But currently, there is a problem in, at least in C#, .NET, that makes all objects a dictionary in our case, and others as well, because there is an issue reported about this. So hopefully this will be fixed in the future. I'm sure it will. So currently, in the tests I'm going to show you later on, I will use NSWAG because that's currently works best. But it is depending on the version and your tools that you are going to use. So you have to pick the right one when you test. But then there are also other configurations that you need to do. You have to configure, for example, the JSON serialization and deserializations. um, how, for example, you should use the case. Should you use camel case, for example? And how you will do with null value handling. These are things that most frameworks you need to configure. So you don't find this in the OpenAPI specification. You find it in your configurations. You have to configure your services. One other thing that reminds me now that you have to configure is how you serialize enumerations, for example. Default, I think, is a number, and we at least almost always like to have a string. DATEX OpenAPI specifications. To get started, we need to have a specification, a contract for our services. At least in our case, since we normally do contract first. That is, we have a contract and then we let the implementers, developers, implement these services. So the services would be interoperable. Whereas another case is when you do your own service and have your API, and then you can generate an open API specification from your API, your custom API. As a starting point, we have created an open API specification for each DATEX 2 Exchange PSM that we currently have. So we have simple HTTP pull, snapshot pull, simple push, snapshot push, simple CIS, and stateful CIS. We are going to create a snapshot pull service later on, so I think we should look at how this open API specification looks like. And now I'm using Visual Studio Code as editor with some plugins, extensions. I'm using OpenAPI Swagger editor and YAML, of course, and YAML hearts JSON, which can be used to convert between YAML and JSON. So this is an OpenAPI specification of our snapshot pull service in YAML format. So we can see from the beginning we have OpenAPI 3.0. I can enter my service that I'm going to use. You will see that later on. Some documentation about this service. And the path, this would be how this service is requested. Part of the URL, you could say. And we specify that this is a get we're going to do. This is a simple get. And some more documentation. Now we have a parameter. Normally this get doesn't have a parameter, but we have here implemented if modified since, which is a caching technique, you could say. And you see here at the in parameter is from the header. So this will not be in, it will map from the header of the HTTP request. And the schema is a string. The response from this HTTP get, we see the status code 200, which is normally okay. And here also we put things in the header. Last modified, which is a string. And the content that is coming back is, the type is application JSON, so it's a JSON format. And the schema for this is component schema's message container. And the message component, the components is defined here, message container. And in this case, we reference our external, or let's say external message, we reference our message container from the DATEX 2 message container JSON schema. So in this case, I put the snapshot pull definition and the JSON schemas in the same folder, then these references will be resolved. So this is the YAML file that we're going to use later on to create our service. So let's create the DATEX II OpenAPI server. I will use a small situation publication profile. It's more or less just accident from situation publication. I will use already generated DATEX II JSON schemas that will be generated with current web tool. And I will use the OpenAPI specification for snapshot pull. And I will use the framework and Swag because I will use Visual Studio C#. And I will generate a server stub in C#. And I will add some example code so we can get some instances out of this. And I will publish this service to Microsoft Azure cloud platform. And I'm going to use Swashbuckle with its automatic generated test client or documentation client, you could say. And then I'm also going to generate or add a simple test client. If we take a look at the overview diagram, we're going to create a server and we're going to create a client. Both will use code generation based on OpenAPI specification, and the OpenAPI specification will use our JSON schemas, and physically the client will get the OpenAPI specification from the server. Before we start, a few words about NSwag, where you can find it on GitHub, and what it is with the tool chain for ASP.NET and Core and so on and TypeScript. I use the current version, which is 13.2. It's a Windows tool and it's a command line tool. I will only use the command line tool. And this tool, NSwag, can have a lot of different kinds of tools. It can generate from code your API and so on, but I will only use the C# controller generator. So it will generate a controller for me with all classes, the domain model. So we don't have to do that manually. So it would convert our OpenAPI specification and the JSON schemas to C# code. Okay, now it's time to start do some coding. I'm now in the folder where I have the repository for this webinar. So here I have the JSON schema, I have the OpenAPI specifications, the model we used to create this schemas. And from here, I open up the terminal. I'm going to use templates and create the project from command prompt. I could have done that in Visual Studio, but this time I will do it from the command prompt. So now I enter .NET new web API, which is a template I'm going to use. And I will give it a name, DATEX, let's call it snapshot pull, hit enter. And now it created base project for me. I would also jump into this and create a solution file, .NET new SLN. And then I would add the project to this solution, .NET SLN add, and dot will add all projects in this file in the directory. So now we have a solution file created. We can see that in the browser. So it's created now a complete Visual Studio temp project that we could start work from. And we open up this solution file. We can see what it has created for us. It is from standard template. There's some weather forecast actually. So we could just hit play and see if we have an API created. And we have, and we see it added Swagger automatically, which is OpenAPI. And we have, this is actually what is called a swashbuckle. So the test client. So we can see there is one method, weather forecasts, and we can go in and try it actually and execute. And then we see the response from this method. Here are some weather forecasts. Excellent. And now I go back to the terminal and I would check that we have nswag installed like this. And we have, and here we see it's a lot of different commands or programs you can use. And we will use this an API to CS controller. And you can go in and check the commands so I can look at the web. I have prepared a command file. So we will just copy this file into the folder and then we can look at it instead. So we save some time. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to prepare some files that we need. So let's go into our directory. And here, let's create a directory called www root, which will be the web root of our API or our web. And then we create another directory, called it DATEX snapshot pull. And another version 1.0.0 like that. And inside this folder, we copy the JSON schemas. And this is both the payload schema and the exchange schema. Copy that. Here. And then we take the OpenAPI specification. Well, that can take both. It doesn't matter. Like, so we have them in the same folder. Like that. Now we can go back to our command file and we will execute nswag OpenAPI to CS controller. And the input should be, see now, relative to where we are. It should actually be www roots -datex pull. One dot zero. wrong here, like that. Next class name, let's say DATEX. And namespace, let's say change that to DATEX snapshot pull. And the output, the controller, will be in the controllers folder and call it DATEX controller.cs. That's good. Use liquid templates, that's a parameter for the framework. Don't actually know what it does. And we use ASP.NET Core MVC, and the base class controller should be the controller, and controller style should be partial, and the JSON library, this one is important. Here we say that we're going to use Newtonsoft JSON. Default is the new system.text.json, and I tried that and tried to use it at first, but it has issues with let's see, it was issues with case of the enumeration literals. So I take this one because it works. Okay, and we save that file. So let's check if we have everything correctly before going on. Oh, I see I have the old YAML file. My earlier tests I did. This should be the correct name. Save. Okay. And now we can go to the terminal and we can hit enter. Or now we run the command file that we have created and see if it generates the file. And yes, it generates just fine. We can jump to our Visual Studio solution, and we see here that now we have a DATEX controller here. So this is the file that we now generated. And we can see what it has done. You can see some auto-generated texts. We have a DATEX snapshot pull namespace as we specified. And we see an interface, the DATEX controller implements this interface. And we see a lot of classes. If you look here, it has generated code for all our, what we had in our JSON schema, or in the OpenAPI specification, you can say. So we have an accident, for example, the content of the accident. We see some errors here. That's because we don't, by default, the Newtonsoft is not included. So we go to packages. So we can add that. Search for Newton. Newtonsoft JSON, that is what we need to have. At least to start, we need more than, but let's take this one first. Install that. You see all the errors disappeared. And now we don't have any red marks here. It's known to say. We can test to build our project. And it compiles. We can then do some cleaning. We can remove the weather forecast controller. And entity for it. Like that. And then we can just try to hit play and see if our DATEX controller is known, if it finds it. And yes, it does. We haven't implemented anything yet, but it is here. We can see the modify since also in the header. And he also gives some examples of how it could look like. And we see the schema. We can drill down all automatically generated. Fine. I can see from the design here that it's supposed to create a class that implements this interface, and we should use dependency injection to connect these two. So I go ahead and add a controller, add new item, take an already class, call it my roller, like that. And we like this one to inherit from what's it called? Let's go and see. This interface. I have to implement this interface. I can just go and generate the code for me, like that. And we can see that it's get a parameter if modified since. So this is all done automatically. And this method will return a message container. And it's asynchronous, that's why we see the tasks and so on. So you don't have to worry about that. So now we can start enter our code that we like to return. Should be a message container. You can create an object for that, like this. And this message container should contain a payload, I assume, which is a list. Like that. And this takes some time to do, so I have prepared a test accident. So I can just copy this code inside here now. And we can see what it does. Create payload. I set some attributes on this, publication time, creator, and so on. Create a list of situations. And yeah, here is a real accident. Give it an ID, a version, creation time, set validity. I set collision type, which is an enumeration, collision with animal, and location referencing. I use a point and set point by coordinates as well to the same point. And yeah, now I just add it to the lists, and now I set the exchange information. That this is a payload delivery and so on, and add it to our message container. So this is a complete message. Then we see that we don't have a return. This is an error, it says. And we have to return. We should return a task. Return. Result message container, like that. And we could now just hit enter and test if this works. We have our method. We can use the try it out and execute. And we get an error. Interesting. Yeah, I know why. And this is because I forgot to add our object to the container. So I go to program, and up here somewhere we can take after the builder, we can say builder dot services and add scoped, and we take the interface DATEX controller, and we should have we call it my controller, yes, like that, enter. So now we add to the IOC container the eDatix controller is, and the object for that is my controller. So as soon as this interface is requested or used, object of this type will be created. So now we can try again. How it worked. So we can see an instance of the JSON and that we just created. We see a lot of nulls here, so we're going to fix that as well. So now we have to configure the framework to get rid of the nulls and get the JSON to look as we like. The first thing is that by default, the Schwarzbackel uses not using Newtonsoft. So that's the first thing we're going to add. So we go into new get packages, search for Newton again. And here we have Schwarzbackel aspect core Newtonsoft. So we install that. Apply. Accept. Like that. And then we go to program and add swag again. Here, down here, we're going to do builder dot services dot add Swagger and Gen Newtonsoft support. Now it tells the framework to use Newtonsoft. So that's great. And then we also have to do some other configurations about Newtonsoft. And then I'm going to copy and paste some code because it's a little bit to write. So I'm going to put this here. Actually, hence the add controllers. And we add Newtonsoft for JSON, and then we configure the Newtonsoft to use, for example, null value handling. We ignore, and we have a contract resolver that will camel case property names contract resolver with handle camel case, you can say. And this thing next will use string enums instead of numbers. And well, we can try without this and you see how it looks like. Now we hit enter or run. Didn't work. Oh yes, yeah, it has to be put it in the wrong place before we build app like this. Yes, now it runs. We can have a look at enumerations. Let's see accident cause. And here we see just numbers. So this is what we like to get rid of. And for that, we use this string enum converter, and we like to use camel case for the enumerations diters. We try now. And now we see that we have our enumeration liters. So now let's do some more configuration about the swag again. Remove. Set some options here. This is more comfort to use all of more enhanced features in the schemas and support for non reference types. And we can set some some name and versioning. And since nswag only generates a controller for us, we have to configure the OpenAPI a little bit. So we replace this one. Is with have a route template to the Swagger framework like this. So it would the end would be openapi.json for us now. Let's say the dynamic OpenAPI specification will be called openapi.json. And then the user interface also needs some configuration. The endpoint will be DATEX snapshot pull version 1.0.0 and openapi.json. And I add a route prefix would be just OpenAPI. So yeah, you will see when I run what it means. So now I don't find a swagger.index. Instead, we have to enter OpenAPI. And now it gets, so we have some definitions here set. And we can see the actual OpenAPI.json file, which is here. So this is dynamically generated now from our source code. And the schema is also generated all from our source code. So we could have stopped here, but there is also one other option we have. We can actually use static files, and that's why I created this www root and the DATEX snapshot pull and version 1.0 and put our schemas here. Well, I use them to generate our code, but I can also configure the framework to actually use these files instead of generate them dynamically from the code. That would give better performance with static files, and I really like that you actually use the OpenAPI specification that we have standardized and not something that I have generated in my code. So let's go on and configure to use dynamic static files instead. That's first I will remove this so I don't forget it later on. This makes it only available the Swagger UI in development, and I would like to use it everywhere. So I just comment those lines out. And what we have to do is use static files. And let's see if we should change something more. I will change this line. But not to DATEX API with snapshot pull. Version 1.0.0, and this points to our JSON file, the OpenAPI specification, which is this one. And we can have a change the route prefix to DATEX snapshot pull. Let's see if that works. So now use that. Yes, it works. And it will hopefully find our static file, and it does. And I see that because here I also put some server information in. So this is the static file. And I have the same methods. I execute and it didn't work. Yeah. And the reason is that I have using the wrong server. You can see here that we had in the OpenAPI specification specified two servers, one that is in Azure and one that is my local development. And the default one, the first one, is the Azure one. So this doesn't work now. The local environment is working as expected. You can also see now that the JSON looks much, much better. There is some issues that I haven't looked into. It you see here, for example, that we have complete payload fall and message sequencing number 0. This shouldn't actually happen because I haven't set them and they are optional. So there are issues as well with this framework. It's currently, but they are minor. Could live without. You have to specify some values manually to override default values. So now let's go on and publish this to the cloud, Microsoft Azure. I have already created a publishing profile. So that is nothing special with that. It's just a simple web app. And yeah, I can just hit publish. It will be published to the cloud. It will be on this URL. And hopefully it will work there as well. Now it's finished and it's going to this URL. And we had called it DATEX snapshot pull. Yes, it's working. We see both our servers, just one works, of course, in the cloud. And we can test the service in Swashbuckle. And it works. It's running in the cloud. Now, let's very quick create the C# client using our newly created service. Create a new project. Take a console app. Hit next. And call it C# client. And I call CS client. Hit next. Next we can take, let's take 7. Like this. The simplest application you can create. Hello world, one line of code. And now go into add. And we like to add a connected service. And here you can choose 2. You can use OpenAPI as a service reference. You can also use Unchased OpenAPI Swagger connected service. And I choose this one. And call service name DATEX snapshot pull. We should just get one thing here, the endpoint. And for that, we can take this one. And I don't there are things you can configure here. Yeah, generates C# client will be good because that's what we like to have. And let's try. Need to enter something more. Not the file name. No, nothing more. Default settings, yes. You can configure a lot, but just go on. So now it reads the OpenAPI specification from the Azure service and generating code for me. And now it's done. So we see here, OpenAPI. Here we have a lot of code generated for us from our OpenAPI specification. Great. And we need to have a NuGet package on Newtonsoft because I stick to that here as well. That's one. Oh, it's already installed. Okay. And we should have a client here. Yes, a client. Using which is a namespace. CS client. Should be in the beginning of the file. Can remove hello world. And using Newtonsoft. And we should have the HTTP client we're going to use. And call it client. Client. New. Put our HTTP client as a constructor. Something is wrong. Like that. And then we should configure the base URL of the client. And we can call this one. And we skip the if modified since because it's optional. I put in an empty string. And what can we do next? I prepared some code so that doesn't be much faster. Since it's asynchronous, we wait till it's finished. Then we use JSON to serialize it into a JSON again, just to see how it looks. And we write that to the console. Then I pick out an accident, the accident object from this object that has been is in the message container. And then I write out the ID of the accident type, and the collision type. and then I just wait. So let's see if this works. And yes, it did work. We see the JSON payload that was returned and the ID of the accident, and the accident type is accident, and the collision type is collision with animal. So that's it. We have, with just a few lines of code, created an OpenAPI client, consuming the server that we have created earlier. To summarize, we have generated an OpenAPI server based on the OpenAI specification and the JSON schemas that we supplied. We did two versions, one dynamic and one with static files. We published this to Azure. And we also created a very simple client consuming our OpenAPI server. And the source code that I've shown is in GitHub at this URL. You also find all code from this webinar there. So that's it. Thank you for watching.